Welcome to the Prime Property Finance Podcast with Gareth Morgan and Mark Watts. This unique podcast will dive deep into all areas of property investing finance, going behind the scenes with property professionals, investors and clients. Between us, we have 35 plus years experience in property finance. The podcast has been launched to share knowledge, mindset requirements and experiences of successful investors and professionals. We aim to simplify many of the complicated areas of finance and investing and provide valuable and easy to implement tips. Keep an eye out for our new longer episodes every Tuesday and our shorter ones every Friday. Welcome to the latest episode of the Prime Property Finance Podcast with myself, Gareth Morgan and Mark Watts. In this episode, we're going to do something a little bit different where we're going to just review some case studies of some deals that have currently going on and have been done recently, and just try and pick out some lessons and learnings to share with you so that hopefully you don't make the same mistakes and try and retain funds, because ultimately it's all about not losing money in deals. So yeah, we want people to invest with skill and confidence. And so hopefully you can pick something up from this and not make the same mistakes. So let's dive in. Mark, welcome to the latest episode of the Prime Property Podcast. And this week we are going to do something a little bit different. And we're going to talk some case studies of some cases that we've had recently. And, you know, most case studies prove with a lot of lessons with them. And these are two more where things have kind of gone wrong as opposed to gone right, potentially, and we'll try and pick out some lessons from that so that you listeners can learn from it with us and try and share those expensive-ish lessons that other people have had, and hopefully you don't make those mistakes. So do you want to kind of just give us, maybe just do one at a time, do you want to give us a bit of a summary of one of the deals in the first instance?
Yeah, sure. The conversation we had was around case studies, and I think what we find is, people are very quick to promote the quirky deals that have gone well. We thought it would be useful to actually unpack the more straightforward deals that haven't gone so well. Some of them are catastrophic, some of them are just inconveniences and perhaps make a loss and so on. So yeah, useful to have these conversations so that people can learn from other people's mistakes. Property is not without its risk. And even the most robust due diligence still comes with an element of risk. There are plenty of unknowns when you start this road on a project. So yeah, we'll look to unpick this and hopefully, as I say, pull out some of the lessons that we've identified from there and go from there. So this particular scenario, it's an ongoing case, so it's obviously been heavily redacted, not to talk about the actual specific individual or individuals or the specific property, but as an overview, you'll get a sense as to the project. We'll highlight some of the challenges that existed within it, some of the things that didn't go as planned during the process, and then obviously the outcome and how we did or didn't manage to rectify the situation on the front of that. So I'll start with the very beginning. This was an auction purchase. Okay, so instantly the alarm bells go off, in so much that auction purchases bring with them the short timescales, the extra pressure, that you haven't got the time to fix problems, and instantly, everybody's on high alert as soon as you get an auction purchase coming through. This person was a first-time landlord or a first-time investor, so this was their first project. And we can sometimes see this a lot with first-time investors who are probably hungry for that deal, rather than having a bit of patience and waiting for the right deal, might go and chase a deal, which is probably the case as we go through it with this one. So super keen to get on the ladder and probably press the button a bit sooner than they needed to.
Don't be a motivated buyer is the, they teach you in property investing circles to look for motivated sellers. People who need to get rid of their properties because they've got problem or impending repossessions or got financial issues. But on the flip side of that, you don't want to be a motivated buyer. You're wound up and motivated to get out there and build your portfolio and work on your net wealth and things. But you and I've been in this position when I started, that you're hungry and you want to get going, and you're you look at a load of deals and you miss out on some and you get gazumped and you can't make it work. And then all of a sudden you see something and you're trying to make a deal work rather than the deal being a good deal and you're doing a deal for doing a deal's sake. So there's plenty of that out there.
Yeah, and an auction is unfortunately ripe for that sort of thinking because it is instant, that the hammer falls and you've won, so that is it, it's yours. So there was that coupled with the fact that they had a conversation with a lender for about 10 days that didn't proceed the way that they wanted to. So we didn't get instructed for 2 weeks after the hammer fell. So for those who are unfamiliar with auction purchase, you get typically under normal auction conditions, 28 days to complete the purchase. On modern method, it's 56. This one was a 28-day completion. So if you take 10 days out of the 28 days, you're now looking a little over 2 weeks to get this deal done. And whilst many bridge lenders will tell you how fast they can do it, the reality is that is a challenge, irrespective of how good the lender is on that front. So we were already up against it in regards to timescales. So yeah, we had to get our skates on with it. So this person was buying a 3-bed house, a 3-bed semi-detached property. They intended on converting it into a 4-bed HMO. Okay. So they were not doing any extensions or structural work to the property as such. They were just going to reconfigure the internals to optimize its space and turn it into a 4-bed HMO. There was no license required. So the licensing laws were such that 4 individual households could come together and it still wouldn't be deemed as a licensed HMO. So they could operate it as such. And to the best of my knowledge, there was no planning requirements. Obviously, that would have been proven or disproven during the process. On the back of that, purchase price was £75,000 for the property. Estimated refurb was £30,000. And initially, we were told that the GDV or the end value was going to be £240,000. So you can see there's quite a bit of profit in that one, to be fair. However, and this is where the alarm bells did start coming in even more so, was that GDV was worked out on a commercial valuation basis for a HMO. Okay, so again, we've covered quite a bit of this, haven't we, in the past around commercial values on HMOs. There are other episodes, so I won't go in it too much, but a yield-based valuation versus a vacant possession valuation are 2 different things. So he'd worked his numbers out on the commercial value. In reality, well, we definitely have to do it from a bridging perspective, is we have to work it on the vacant possession value. And then that brought it down to 160. So still viable, but the numbers now all of a sudden no longer as attractive.
And also just to jump in quickly, you're never going to get a commercial valuation on a 4-bed HMO anyway. So, that was a non-starter from day one. So yeah, a little bit more planning and research up front would have quickly nipped that in the bud, I guess is the key.
Definitely. And let alone the 4 beds, but it didn't even need a license. So effectively it was just a house that was operating as a HMO. So it was, definitely never going to get one, in that regard. So yeah, so we had to work on the vacant possession basis 160, which obviously changed the numbers, but still was profitable, just not as profitable. However, and there's always a however, the valuer went out and had a look at the property and completely disagreed, basically. So so the valuation came back in for the vacant possession basis of 125,000. And they completely disagreed with the refurb costs as well. So they budgeted 20,000 a room, or 25,000 a room, sorry. So total spend of 100K to get this property converted to the 4-bed HMO that it was going to be, given the works, because they wanted to put en suites and various bits and pieces. I think a chimney breast needed moving and all sorts of reconfiguration to make it work. So as you can imagine, if you're buying it for 75,000, it's got £100,000 worth of works. That's 175,000 spend, and it's worth 125 when you're finished. That's not a good deal in anyone's book, So yeah, the lender obviously came back and went, well, this is non-viable as a HMO.
So just to understand a little bit more then, obviously you mentioned that the client won the property at auction. They spent 2 weeks messing around with a lender and that didn't go anywhere. So they came to you then after 2 weeks, so halfway through the process, and then said to you, right, here's the deal, here's all the numbers. You have to, it's your job not to sort of to trust their information in terms of valuations and refurb costs, because one, you're not a valuer, so you don't know what the end value is going to be in that location for that property type. And two, you're not a builder or a quantity surveyor, and you haven't visited the property. And again, you're taking their figures for face value. So, ultimately we will sense check numbers when we get them, but ultimately that's the client's responsibility to make sure that those numbers are accurate. And even more so in this case, where you've got 2-week deadline from initial phone call to completion. So how long did it take you to get from the client's inquiry to get the application in with the lender?
So this particular one, I think it was a day or two.
Okay, so pretty quick turnaround. And then how quickly was the valuation done?
So the valuation was instructed almost immediately as soon as the application goes in. So you'll instruct the valuation before underwriting in these scenarios, because you need the valuation to finish underwriting. So we'll get the information in from the client to share with the lender whilst it's being valued. So it has to happen concurrently. In this scenario as well, we would look to instruct the solicitors at the same time. So everything's happening at the same time. All I would say is there's a risk there that if it doesn't proceed, you've spent money on solicitors, you've spent money on valuations, and it hasn't actually been underwritten. So it comes with risk, but we haven't got the time to do each one sequentially. It's got to just be concurrent in that regard.
Especially when you're halfway through an auction purchase, yeah. And You've already exchanged, haven't you? That's the key.
Yeah, so you've handed over your 10% deposit plus your auction fees. I don't know if there was money spent with the other lender. There was certainly no valuation report from that perspective, so it didn't get very far on that in that regard. It was basically, so the original lender they went to go there on the basis that they needed assistance with the refurb costs. So they needed refurb finance as opposed to bridging, and the lender only did bridging. So that was why that's why it came to be. So a bit of a horror story then, really, as you can imagine, when the valuation report came back in. Client wanted to contest it. Naturally, you would want to contest this because you believe you've done your due diligence. In my experience, when trying to contest valuation reports, you tend not to get very far. So, you're trying to challenge the professional opinion of the valuer, unless there's something materially wrong in a valuation report, i.e. they've mismeasured one of the rooms or one of the flats, which I've had happen in the past. You're not going to win that battle unless you've got a really robust comparables, and even then, there's a reason they haven't used them probably, and so on. So, but besides that, we ultimately just didn't have the time to keep going back and forth and keep challenging the valuer. So we kind of had to just accept it for what it was. There was a conversation around going to get a different valuation done. Now, the issue with that is you can't do that on the basis that which valuation is the lender supposed to go with. And they can't just go with the one that suits their narrative to lend the money. It doesn't work like that. So once it's valued, it's valued. You have to try and change the valuer's mind, as I say, which doesn't get you very far. A bit of a nightmare of a scenario, really, and for all intents and purposes, the client. So in addition to this has obviously been going on for some time. The 28 days had elapsed. So the completion date had been and gone. The seller issued their notice of completion. So what happens then with an auction, if you don't miss the deadline, the seller can issue something called a notice of completion. You don't have to, but they can.
If you do miss the deadline, you mean, yeah.
Yeah, if they miss the deadline. And then that notice of completion is formal notice, really, that if you do not complete within the next 10 working days, we can then cancel the transaction and you are now at a loss and pull out of the deal because you haven't lived up to your end of the bargain. You can get them extended and extended. They usually start charging fees. And in this particular scenario, the client was accruing £100 a day in interest costs for not completing. So as you can imagine, this is now starting to rack up. So not only were they going to make a loss on the property, but they're now incurring costs whilst they can't complete on it. So a lot of talking to the client, and understandably they were distressed on the basis that they were going to lose a considerable sum of money. And we then just had to take a step back, really, and have a look at it and say, well, okay, the only thing you can really do here is take the valuer's advice, which is HMO is non-viable. If you were to just do a standard refurb on this property and just sell it, Don't worry about retaining it and trying to build a portfolio. You're in a bit of a problem. How do you get out of it with the least pain? And so the refurb cost stayed at 30,000. The valuation was 125, I think it was, even as a non-HMO, because the HMO was a bit of a misnomer, really, in so much as just a house. So there was no extra value for that. So as such, what we've been able to do now is get the loan issued on the basis of they're just going to keep it as a 3-bed. They're going to do kitchen, bathroom, the usual refurb stuff. That fits within his budget of 30K. Then he's just going to sell the property. He's not going to make much money, but he's not going to lose money. Lick your wounds, take the lessons, and then live to fight another day, as it were. So that's kind of where we're at with it at the moment. We still haven't completed it yet, but the terms are out there. And bar any legal matter issues, this should complete in the next week or so.
Yeah. So I guess what are the sort of key lessons there that, we've alluded to some of them, but what could the client do, in hindsight, what could he have done better to avoid some of these if he had his time again?
Yeah, so there's a few things. We always talk about due diligence, and that takes many different forms. It's really easy to go, I should have done your due diligence, but specifically what due diligence should have happened probably with this is understanding valuations of HMOs. So if as a first-time landlord, first-time investor, HMOs are a slightly different barrier to entry. So even if the bridge lender did it, you may not have been able to refinance out properly at the level you anticipated. So there's something to bear in mind there as well. So, choose your strategy wisely.
Generally, just to add to that, is when you're a first-time landlord, you can get a buy-to-let mortgage, pretty straightforward. But most, and this isn't all of them, but most HMO lenders require a minimum of 2 years experience as a landlord before they will give you a mortgage on a HMO. So if you're going to go as a first-time landlord, buy at auction, and then buy with a bridge, refinance onto a HMO mortgage within 6 to 12 months, a lot of lenders are going to be put out, and therefore, it's going to be more difficult to repay that loan on the basis and get the exit mortgage that you anticipate.
Yeah, and those lenders that will lend to those that don't have the required experience often don't do the commercial valuations that people are also seeking. So, there's quite a few things to think about really on the
minimum loan amount as well is another one, isn't it?
Absolutely. So there's quite a bit to think about on the exit strategy. So the learning here will be just understand the strategy. Ideally, speak to a finance professional, or if you've got a bridge lender that you've got a relationship with, then speak to them. But I would certainly speak to a broker in advance, run the deal by them, and just do a make sense check. Does that add up in terms of finance? So we aren't there to tell you whether it's a good deal or not. What we can tell you is it financeable at the levels you need it to be done at. So that would be that. I would have suggested that and this is what I would suggest to anyone go to auction, is speak to us before the auction. Don't turn up with the property in your hand. Here's my, I just won this at auction, I now need the finance. That's where things go wrong more often than not. Come to us beforehand. We work on the basis. So we have to make some assumptions. What is my maximum bid? What am I going to spend on the property? What am I hoping to make it into? And then we can run some make sense checks on that and get some terms and so on. So I would have suggested them that would have avoided them going to the wrong lender and realizing that they couldn't fund the refurb works and not have wasted the 10 days or 14 days, whatever it was in that. So that's as best as you can do to get in your finance in advance, get yourself finance ready, I guess, is probably the better term for that. And also I suspect, and I don't know this, but I suspect they've probably had a look online and gone, oh yeah, it's roughly 30 grand's worth of work to do whatever it is, rather than actually go and do an inspection of the property, take a builder with you, map it out and get an actual sense of the cost. The builder will give you a better feel. The 100,000 we shouldn't have a cost of works at 30 and the value say it's 100. Now I get it if it's 80 and the value says 100, that's a different conversation. But to be so far out would imply that a builder hasn't been involved in that process.
The biggest problem I'm seeing at the moment, and we've done projects ourselves and we see clients doing projects and just generally speaking to people, the cost of labour and materials, and I'm banging the drum about this at the moment, over the last 12 to 24 months is incredible. Inflation and just the supply of labour and the cost of materials. And so the danger is that anybody that's done a project, hasn't done a project in the last couple of years, and has done a refurb on their own home in the past, sort of 4 or 5 years ago plus, probably before COVID, and doesn't really have a good idea of what those costs are. They think, oh, I've done a refurb like that before. It cost me about 20k, 25k. So maybe in this day and age, it's now 30k. It just doesn't work like that. And so the costs are phenomenally different. And a lot of people, and developers, especially big developers, are mothballing sites because projects don't work, because the cost to do the build and the refurb outweighs the actual end value of the property. And this is exactly what's happened in this scenario.
Yeah, definitely. And, ultimately, I think that they'll be okay. As I say, they're not going to make much money, but they're not going to lose that money. And what they'll probably get at the back end of this is a huge lesson. They will learn a lot, not just on the finance front, but actually how the property development is going to work and the sales process and everything else that comes with it. So it's probably an invaluable lesson that they're going to go through for free, in effect. And break even at the back end of it. So, like I say, it's not the end of the world.
There's another saying that if you're not earning, you're learning.
Yeah.
Okay, well, hopefully there is a positive and a bit of light at the end of the tunnel, and fingers crossed they can get out of it, like you said, to fight another day.
I think they will. That's, you don't want to see people losing money on deals, and we try to help where we can. Certainly, we don't have a magic wand, but sometimes we can just inject a bit of realism back into the conversation. Understandably, the client was panicking because at the prospect of losing money, so we were able to go in an impartial and objective conversation, say, well, look, just forget the HMO thing and just do this just to get you out of the project. And thankfully he's bought into that idea, and that should, fingers crossed, see him all right.
Is there anything else on this particular one, or should we move on to the next example?
Yeah. Oh, one other thing that I did forget to mention was he instructed his solicitor a week after we got instructed. So again, get your solicitors lined up well in advance. It can take days to get on board with the solicitor if they're the first time you use them as well. So
and also the seller solicitor, so the bridging solicitors won't start any work either until the undertaking is paid. And so again, that's another one that massively holds up the process. And I get the dilemma that clients face themselves in: why should I pay the solicitor's fees or undertake to pay the solicitor's fees without knowing that the deal is going to go ahead? Well, the risk you face is that you drag it out so far that they serve you notice and they pull out of the deal, and you lose your deposit and your auction, costs and things like that anyway. So the downside is usually a lot worse. So you've just got to bite the bullet. When you're in that situation, we've had a few examples of this, and you've just got to get on with it. Unfortunately, as painful and risky as it is, or it may seem, the downside is a lot worse.
Yeah, and the other thing then, I guess, is just if you're new to this whole process, consider, is auction the best place to go and find your deal?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. I know a client of ours, actually, was it a client or a friend or contact of a client? This is quite a few years ago. They were selling a property through auction, and they actually put the property through auction 3 times and sold the property at auction. The people didn't meet the deadline, and they took it back off them. So they kept their 10% deposit. They put it in again, sold it again, different buyers, kept the 10% deposit and put it in a third time. And I think it might have completed the third time, but they ended up with 3 lots of, 2 or 3 lots of 10%, almost paid for. They could afford then to take less on the property in the end. But it's amazing that they were just kept going through that cycle because the buyers weren't prepared or didn't realize what they were buying and didn't do enough due diligence. And so they just kept putting it back in. So, that you could see there are some people, and not that these guys were doing that on purpose, but there are some investors that trade properties and they put properties in auction on the basis that a first-time buyer or a first-time landlord or someone who hasn't done their due diligence buys the property at a whim and pays above the odds for it.
Yeah, definitely. If you're new to this, it's difficult enough. Add the time constraint in it as well. You really are starting to push a deal uphill a little bit. So I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying just do it with your eyes wide open. Do you need that extra layer of pressure if things go wrong? I'm not sure. I'm not so sure. So that was an interesting one. Hopefully, as I say, the outcome will be a good one. I think it will, but plenty of lessons to be picked apart in that one.
Awesome. So should we jump on to the next one?
Okay, so this one's a little different. This is a property that's already been purchased, and it is a block of flats. Now, title splitting is quite popular, or it certainly sounds. We have a lot of conversations around it. Do we do that much of it? We do a fair amount, but often there's a lot of fact finding that goes on from clients who are exploring the opportunity of title splitting. And sometimes the benefit versus the risk is not really there. But this particular individual had gone ahead and bought a block of flats. This block of flats was worth circa 200,000. Okay, so 5 flats, 200,000. So you can sort of picture in your mind the sort of size of this building. It's not going to be huge. And it was previously a house that had been converted into 5 flats, effectively. They bought it with a bridge loan with a view to asset manage, inverted commas, this property. So often when people say they want to asset manage it, they want to sweat the asset so it makes it worth more than when you purchased it. So you can do that by doing a refurb on it and uplifting it and buying it low, adding value by refurbing it and refinancing it at a higher value. This particular instant was doing a refurb, but title splitting. Now, just a bit about title splitting to explain why it is a strategy is 5 flats together as a block. Let's say it's worth 200,000. The market you can sell that to is only ever going to be an investor market. Nobody's going to buy that as a house to live in 5 flats as a family. Yeah. So as a result, as any investor is going to want a deal, they're not going to want to pay, 5 times 2-bed flats equivalent value. And as such, when you get a block of flats valued, you'll get the block value, which is roughly 10% less than the equivalent of 5 times the flat value. So what many people consider doing is splitting all the flats out into individual units. That then opens the property up to the standard market, the home mover market, and therefore you can justify having 5x or 5 times the unit values. So you can get a roughly 10, maybe 15% uplift in value just by doing a paper exercise. Now, that is a thing, and I've seen it done very, very well, but it doesn't fit every scenario. So this person is now in a position where they want to split the titles. They've obviously worked out a few things, really. Is A, they're looking for a commercial value on the block. Well, that's an extremely limited set of circumstances. You'll get a commercial value on a multi-unit block, and there are very few lenders that will do it. Also, the issue you've got with this that they were looking at as well is if you split the titles is most lenders have a minimum property value with it as well. So when you look at the minimum property value, they're usually 50,000. Well, by my maths, 200,000 divided by the 5 does not equal 50,000 a unit. Therefore, they're going to have an issue hitting the minimum standard. So what you would traditionally do is you would knit together 2, maybe 3 lenders to do individual mortgage on individual apartment, which will then get you back up to what the value will be. And the other issue with this one is because of the nature of the property, I think 3 of the flats are below 30 square meters, meaning that you're going to have an issue getting a mortgage on a flat less than 30 square meters.
I guess there's just a caveat in there is that you can get a mortgage on a flat that's less than 30 square meters, but it's unlikely only probably in areas where there's a high demand for those and a resale market. And so if it's in London, for instance, and it's a 28 square meter flat, but it's worth 200K, then because of the demand and the locale, then it would work. But in lower value areas where there aren't as many flats, especially of this value, there's not a huge resale market, as you say, then you're not going to get that same And lenders on a block, on a multi-unit block, will take a view on it because they're doing the block as a whole, but individually they don't tend to work out so well.
Yeah, and as you say, the block as a whole, the people who are going to occupy are renters, so they are going to be, and the rent will match or mirror the size of the flat, whereas somebody to buy as a home, as you say, the market isn't necessarily there for it. So, and then when you couple that with, when you try to knit lenders together on a multi-unit block, I'll keep this as high level as I can, so what happens is when you split the title, you create leases for all of the properties. So you have a freehold, and then you have 5 leasehold flats, effectively, that sit there. When you go to mortgage a leasehold flat, because you also own the freehold, lenders invariably will want an interest in the freehold as well. And that interest often takes the form of a first charge. Well, it's called a first charge for a reason. You can only give one first charge, and you've got 5 flats. So as soon as you mortgage one to a lender that wants a first charge, the other 4 flats can't be mortgaged with a lender that also wants a first charge. And usually the lenders that will do these less than 30 square meters often fall into the building society category as well. And they are far more rigid in their security requirements. So the whole thing just starts to fall apart, as you can see, that it becomes really quite difficult. And if I'm saying it's 10% uplift, that's a £20,000 uplift in value. By the time you've paid for all the properties to be created into leaseholds at £1,500 a lease, and all the legal work that's got to go into it, plus the remortgages are going to be, 2% arrangement fees minimum, plus the legal work that goes into redoing the mortgages and everything like that, is a £20,000 uplift worth the hassle. You probably end up making a loss by the time all is said and done off the back of that as well. So yeah, as I say, they're in a bridge loan. I think their best strategy is going to be just to get a remortgage onto a multi-unit block. They've done some refurb on it, and we should experience an uplift in value, just not to the level they want. Again, it's going to be one that probably will at least wash its own face and make a little bit of money. What I would say with this, the thing that has really got going for it yields extremely well. I think it's like 16% yield.
I was just about to say, that's why they are attractive to investors, is that because they yield so well. And so it does take a sting out of it that if they couldn't do what they want to do, there is a backup plan, and the cash flows really well. Therefore, you hopefully won't take too long to get your money back out on an ROI basis.
Yeah, I think it's one of those properties, isn't it, where it's a really good investment, but you're not going to, it's not a good property for what they're trying to do ultimately, to do the uplift in value piece.
It's a cash flow investment.
It is absolutely
not a profit gain.
You're going to park your money in it, and you're going to do well out of your yield, as opposed to trying to buy, refurb, refinance, get all your money out, do another deal. This isn't the property for that, unfortunately. So, but yeah, ultimately it'll be a nice little investment when they refinance it, and as long as they can keep it occupied, then I think they'll do quite well out of it.
So any other quirks to this particular deal? Where does the title split? I think what you mentioned earlier is obviously based on, 200K, 40K a flat. There are some lenders that will lend, have a minimum property value or no minimum property values. Some kick in at 50K, but the majority of lenders, especially to lend into limited companies, have a minimum property value of 75K. So I think, from an outsider looking into this, I'd be saying, if you're considering a title split, then you really want to be making sure that the split value on the property is as minimum, I would say 85, 90K or above. So that gives you some wriggle room for down valuations. So if you can be really confident that they're worth 80, 85K or more, ideally 3 figures, I think those are where these deals work best. So if you were buying this at sort of 5 flats for 500K, and they're going to be worth sort of 150 each, or 125 or 130, you can see then there's 100, 150K of uplift then in values. That's where this kind of starts to make sense. And the fees as a the fees to create the titles and the legal fees and things won't change as a percentage of that uplift. So that, the percentage of the gain reduces and your profit margin increases. So a number of factors really to consider. And I guess when you're thinking about title splitting, what is your end game? Are you buying this to, is it a profit play? in which case you are buying it to split the titles and sell the individual units on and as a profit, or are you buying 5-unit multi-unit block for long-term hold, in which case there's no real point. It's an investment strategy for cash flow, and therefore there's no point going through the exercise of splitting the titles and creating the leases, etc., and having that additional headache. You can have one mortgage on a multi-unit block over the 5 units, as opposed to having 5 separate mortgages over the 5 separate properties and 5 lots of valuations and 5 lots of legals, etc. So, yeah, awesome.
Yeah, it's the other things as well to bear in mind is going to be if you've got 5 separate mortgages, you'll have 5 separate valuers. So they might be identical flats. But I would probably, I'm not a gambling man, but I would put money on the fact that those values won't come back the same from 5 different people. There will be disparities between them, and often not the way you want it to look as well. I've seen them come back quite different on projects that I've worked on in the past. So that to bear in mind. Others may be listening to the podcast saying, I can get one mortgage across all 5 properties. You can, but that comes with a different set of challenges. It's quite a very unique type of lending. And if you ever were to sell one of them, you have to repay, you can't retain 25% of the equity. And so there's pros and cons to it. But yes, you can, but it isn't the typical way of dealing with it when you go to split titles to get these values, because a lot of lenders will then say, well, it's technically just a block. So we'll limit our loan to value to 70%. And well, that takes away all the benefit of trying to get the uplift to then reduce what you can borrow in the first instance. So yeah, just caveat a lot of this. The title splitting is a thing, and I've seen it work extremely well, especially where there's commercial involved in it. There's probably a stronger argument there, but I think you're right. Just understanding what's the end game here, and is it actually worth it, and is it going to deliver what you think it's going to deliver? Worth doing your homework properly. And just because it works on paper, it doesn't mean the lenders will lend against it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, well, that's awesome. Thanks, Mark, and thanks for going into some detail there. And hopefully there's been some really important lessons for people that can learn from that and educate people, as we're always trying to do. So I guess the final sentiment is if you are looking at an auction particularly, then get in touch, get your advice, do your due diligence and ask questions before it. And if you're a first-time landlord, if you've never bought the property, probably auction isn't the right way to get started. And then also just if you are doing deals, just get some professional advice from a broker, a solicitor, a surveyor, a QS, all of the different elements that will affect the deal up front before you actually buy it effectively.
Definitely. I think I couldn't agree more.
Thanks for your time, Mark. Appreciate it. And looking forward to catch up soon.
Yep. Catch you in a bit. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the episode. Hopefully you got some value out of that and picked up some little nuggets and lessons. If you enjoyed the episode, as always, we'd appreciate it if you could share with any friends or family or contacts that you meet along the way on your journey, and the people that might find this valuable. And keep liking and subscribing, and we'd love it if you could leave us a review. So many thanks, and hopefully see you again soon. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. We hope you have learned something and have some tips to take away. We'd be very grateful if you enjoyed the show. You could give us a review and share with anyone that you know that may be interested. And of course, subscribe to the show so you can get notified when a new episode is released. If you'd like us to answer any questions or go deeper on a specific topic, please drop us a message at primeproperty.finance. See you on the next episode.